Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ahmedabad Management Association, I welcome you all to this 42nd consistent budget analysis session. This is for 2022. And as usual, we have Professor Bakul Dholakia and Mukesh Bhai Patel with us, who will be analyzing the budget. And without taking much of your time, and before I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Sawan Godiawala, our Vice President, I'll welcome our esteemed guests with a bouquet of flowers.
Yeah, respected Bakul Bhai, so nice to see you again year on year for this very sought after event. Good evening, Mukesh Bhai. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen joining this meeting, as well as those who are watching this live. So once again, we are here with how many? I'm sure I'm missing the number, but it is more than 30. Mukesh Bhai would certainly put the right number. It's 30 years, Mukesh Bhai, more than 30, right?
42.
42. My goodness. So it's 42, and so we are here, and I know it is for the two gentlemen who have been giving us a lot of insights and knowledge on what is happening in the economy and taxation, as well as the real dissection of the budget. So without further ado, I would want to introduce Shri Bakul Bhai and Mukesh Bhai. Both of them do not need any introduction otherwise also, especially on this platform, but still it as a protocol, as well as for the people who are joining fresh from all parts of the maybe nation and world, this would be helpful. So Dr. Bakul Bhai is a former director, IIM Ahmedabad. He has been a director, International Management Institute at Delhi, Adani Institute of Infrastructure Management, and many other institutes. He has been a doctorate in economics, 47 years of experience, and during his tenure at IIM, he occupied a Reserve Bank chair, as well as he was a dean, and then of course from 2002 up to 2007, he has been a director at IIM Ahmedabad. He was awarded out of course, so many awards, the Best Professor Award at IIM, and guided several PhD students that he has done over his tenure. Dr. Dholakia is an awardee. Has been awarded Padma Shri, a Bharat Asmita National Award. We also received a prestigious IMA Award of Excellence in Academic Leadership, among many others. And he has been a board member of Reserve Bank of India, Western India Board, Western Area Board from 93 up to 2001, and chairman of National Board of Accreditation. Dr. Dholakia, as we all know, has worked on numerous government committees, including the recent one, Rangarajan Committee on Pricing and Taxation. He's authored 12 books and has been part of and has monographed and written more than 50 research papers. So thank you, Dr. Bakul Bhai. Very keen to listen to the economic analysis, and of course there are a lot of questions that I have, but we will take it at the right time. I will also introduce Mukesh Bhai right at this time, and then so that I can hand over the platform to the two dignitaries and two important speakers of the day. Mukesh Bhai, of course, again, doesn't need any introduction. He's sitting at the place where he has been, giving us the legacy. He has been, of course, past president at AMA. He is a president, Indo-Japan Friendship Association, founder of Japan Information and Study Center and Zen Kaizen at AMA. And I'm sure a lot of you might have visited this place, but you must visit the Zen Garden at the Kaizen and the Kaizen Academy at AMA. Managing Director at International Tax and Investment Consultants, an eminent lawyer that he is, an international tax expert involved in legal education and tax journalism. Mukesh Bhai has authored number of acclaimed books and hosted regular TV shows. We have been seeing recently some shows which are sought after again. An institution builder, I mentioned past president, Ahmedabad Management Association, Gujarat Chamber of Commerce and Industries at Ahmedabad, and all Gujarat Federation of Tax Consultants. Mukesh Bhai is a director on several companies, leading by public companies board. And on the other side of that, he is, and that lot of people know, 151 times blood donor that he is, has visited Japan 35 times. And if you see any pictures around him in his house and office, you can say that what photographer he also makes out of such a professional career. So thank you so much, Dr. Bakul Bhai and Mukesh Bhai, for your presentation or your insights that we all are looking forward to. And I will hand over, as I think in the sequence, first Dr. Bakul Bhai can give us the insights on the economic aspects. And of course, Bakul Bhai, that I cannot hold myself. Very keen that this 39 lakh outlay and a huge infrastructure outlay, would it be inflationary at all? One. And two, maybe the budget is done as if COVID is gone. So is it that all these things would happen? What happens if COVID sustains or continues a little longer? But yes, we are keen to hear you. Over to you, Dr. Bakul Bhai, please.
President of Ahmedabad Management Association, my learned distinguished colleague Shri Mukesh Patel, the members of Ahmedabad Management Association, and all those who have joined online for this budget analysis, which, as the President mentioned, is the 42nd year in a row that we are doing it at Ahmedabad Management Association. And it has been my immense pleasure to be in your midst on the evening after the budget. And this we have been consistently following. Now, this is the fourth budget that Nirmala Sitharaman is presenting. And like previous ones, this budget was also presented under fairly challenging scenarios. As the Vice President mentioned, that the budget is presented thinking that COVID is gone. I don't think that anybody in the right frame of mind will ever assume that. And Nirmala Sitharaman has certainly not assumed that. It is abundantly clear from whatever she had to say. In fact, right at a time when all of us thought that we have overcome the second wave of COVID and all the tragedies that the second wave brought, which were far worse than what the first wave, which happened in 2020, had brought about. The world was hit by the Omicron, which we now call the third wave. And the spread of Omicron was very wide. Now, so domestically, our economy was barely recovering from the massive shock of the pandemic, which we suffered in 2020, and therefore the 2021 was the first year in the history of Indian economy where our real GDP growth as well as nominal GDP growth was substantially negative. Now, it never happened in the history of post-independent India that nominal GDP growth turned negative. Now, we were barely coming out of it in the year 21-22, and the second wave hit us very badly. As we recovered from the second wave, the third wave in the form of Omicron hit us again. So we had fairly tough, challenging situations to handle at the domestic front. But friends, let me also tell you that compared to last year, when at least the world economy was on an ascent and the International Monetary Fund had predicted that the global economic growth is going to jump substantially in the year 21-22. This year, IMF released the forecast of the global economy in January 22. It's only hardly 10 days ago that IMF released the forecast. So this year's budget is presented in the backdrop of a challenging global economic environment, more challenging than it was last year. The latest report of IMF, which was released in January 22, says, and I quote, "The global economy enters 2022 in a weaker position than previously expected. As the new Omicron COVID-19 variant spreads, several countries have reimposed mobility restrictions. Rising energy prices and supply disruptions have resulted in higher and more broad-based inflation than it was anticipated earlier. Notably in the United States, many emerging market and developing economies, the ongoing retrenchment of China's real estate sector and slower than expected recovery of private consumption have also restricted growth prospects. Global economic growth is expected to moderate from 5.9% in 2021 to 4.4% in 2022, which essentially means that 1.5% decline in global GDP growth rate. Also, most of the advanced countries are going to gradually move towards withdrawal of fiscal benefits and monetary accommodation, which was granted earlier. And in 2022, we would see the tapering of all these benefits which were given, and interest rates will start to rise. This scenario will obviously adversely affect global liquidity and global trade in the year 2022. This is going to have a negative impact on India's exports and FDI and FII inflows into Indian economy, which would result in lower growth prospects for Indian economy in the financial year 22-23. So this was a challenge that the finance minister was facing when she was preparing the budget. It was imperative for the FM to strongly counter these global threats. Moreover, the significant impact of the second wave of the pandemic during the first half of 21 and the emergence of Omicron threat in the second half slowed down the recovery of Indian economy during 21-22. We grew by 9.2%, but if the second wave and third wave had not happened with the intensity with which they happened, probably we would have registered a double-digit growth. We would have grown by 10 or 11%. Now, this year's budget required a strong focus on economic growth not only in 22-23, but over the next few years to quickly regain the lost ground. And we lost a lot of ground in the last 2 years. That is precisely what the FM has delivered, in my view, through her sharply focused and primarily growth-oriented budget proposals, which were presented yesterday. With elections in 5 states scheduled in February-March, many had expected FM to present a populist budget this year. But it is indeed remarkable that she has chosen growth over populism. A tough choice given the compelling political considerations of short-term electoral gains. I truly admire the phenomenal clarity of thought, sharp focus on key objectives propelling economic growth and reviving investment cycle, with less emphasis on short-term fiscal consolidation and remarkable transparency as well as realism in the budget estimates of both revenue as well as expenditure. And all this with a clear purpose of achieving the credibility of budget proposals on the part of the finance minister this year, like she had attempted last year. No hype, no drama, no fuss, just business-like professional approach. This is what was the hallmark of the budget speech and the budget proposals which was presented yesterday. A classic example of this is the way she dealt with the much hyped issue of crypto assets. There was a lot of debate about cryptocurrencies and crypto assets in this country in the months before the budget was presented. While proposing a 30% tax on the gains made from transfer of virtual digital assets, which includes all the cryptocurrencies, she underlined that only the central bank of any country, which in our case is Reserve Bank of India, can issue any form of currency. And she said, and I quote, RBI will come with a digital currency. Outside of it, buying and selling is happening and profits are being made. So nothing stops me from taxing it. Taxing them does not actually bring legitimacy. Now this is as crisp and as clear as it can become. So I'm going to tax any profits that you make on transfer of crypto assets or virtual digital assets, and simply because I'm taxing it does not mean that anything which is not issued by RBI becomes legal or legitimate. The legal issues are separate and will be taken care of later on. Now, it was as candid as that, and this is an example of the clarity of thought in doing what was done. Now, regarding, and I personally believe that this budget has a high level of transparency and realism in all its proposals. Now, to highlight this, let me again refer to what she said. She said during her interaction with the media soon after the budget was presented that she has presented a conservative but realistic budget with realistic estimates. And I quote, "The budgets are being made with realistic numbers. In last year's budget, it was well established that we gave the numbers, followed it up, and achieved it. We also brought on board certain expenditures that were earlier kept out of the budget, sweeping under the carpet, what we used to call extra budgetary items, which actually reduced the deficit way below what the real deficit was. And therefore, she very rightly said, our estimates are not unrealistic, they are transparent." Now, I would also like to highlight that apart from the choice between populism and growth that she made, the finance minister has also made another and perhaps less obvious choice between control of inflation by itself as a goal versus growth as a goal. High fiscal deficit of 9.2% in the year 2021 was followed by 6.9% this year, and this is bound to create significant inflationary pressure in the economy. And the economy is already plagued by supply bottlenecks arising in the backdrop of COVID pandemic in 2020 and 2021. A pragmatic approach to budget, a conservative approach to budget, would have certainly emphasized tighter control of fiscal deficit in the financial year 2022-23 to mitigate the inflationary pressures. But that would have been at the cost of moderating the GDP growth target in a situation where the economy was still reeling under the massive impact of the pandemic on GDP growth last year. The FM has boldly chosen the path of high GDP growth, taking the associated risk of high inflation. Now, this requires courage. This is a well-calculated risk which she has taken with guts and self-confidence, ignoring the conventional advice to be risk-averse. So we have a budget that raises capital expenditure by an unprecedented 35% under truly challenging fiscal position to deliver a high real GDP growth in 22-23. Stimulating private investment, wages and production over the next few years, not just 22-23, but coming 2-3 years, to ensure that the growth momentum is sustained in the medium term. She has taken this bold risk at a time when inflation is a widespread phenomenon globally, and the wholesale price inflation in India has entered double-digit territory. Wholesale price index is going at more than 10%. Though, as of now, the consumer price index inflation is hovering around 5%, which is around the target set by the Reserve Bank. Now, let me come to, in this background, in this backdrop, let us analyze the budget proposals and what is going to happen to the economy. Now, like I always say, and I had said this last time, and just to remind, that budget calculations are always based on a projection of GDP growth in the coming year. That means in the financial year 22-23, what is the rate at which GDP will grow? Unless you estimate that, you cannot calculate the tax from various sources and also the impact of various expenditures. So budget calculations for this year's budget are made on the projection of 11.1% nominal GDP growth. 11.1%, all three ones. Now that means the nominal GDP is going to be rising from 232,000 crores to 258 lakh crores. Now based on this, we can say that the budget assumes, this is not a number that she has spelled out, but this is something which you have to read between the lines, like I always do over the last several decades. So I can infer that the budget assumes real GDP growth of around 8%, because the economic survey said 8 to 8.5%. So she would not assume less than 8%. So the budget assumes real GDP growth of around 8%, and that leaves you an assumption of inflation of about 3%, because that is what will give you 11.1% nominal GDP growth for the financial year 22-23. Now, if you recall, last year, the nominal GDP growth that she had assumed was 14%. That is, I'm exactly at AMA when I was talking last year. And I had said that it would be, the 14% was a nominal GDP growth, which was based on the assumption of 10% real GDP growth and 4% inflation. Now, towards the conclusion of my speech, I had argued that these are conservative estimates, and in reality, the nominal GDP growth will be anywhere between 17 to 18% in the financial year 21-22. Friends, the real nominal GDP growth in financial year 21-22 is exactly 17.6%. From this podium, I had said 17 to 18%. I had also emphasized that because instead of 14%, the nominal GDP will grow by 17 to 18%, it will create fiscal space for the government to spend more money. And I had estimated that the fiscal space would be somewhere in the region of 2 lakh crores, 2 lakh crores or maybe more. Now the actual fiscal space turned out to be 3 lakh crores. And because of this, we could spend money in the financial year 21-22 in spite of the divestment target falling substantially short. The divestment target was a very ambitious one. 1,75,000 crores was the divestment target. We have achieved hardly 75,000 crores. So there is a shortfall of almost 1 lakh crore in divestment. Now, as against this 1 lakh crore shortfall in divestment, the buoyancy of tax revenues and revenue receipts is 2,90,000 crores. So it has absorbed this and generated additional 2 lakh crore of resources, which is what my calculation was, that there will be a fiscal space of about 2 lakh crores. Now, she had two choices. Part of this fiscal space you use to reduce fiscal deficit, and when you present the budget, come back to the House and tell the Parliament that, look, I had projected fiscal deficit of 6.8%, but I have brought it down to 6.5 or 6.4 or something like that. Now, had she done that, the recovery of Indian economy would have suffered. So she did not do it. Instead, she came to the Parliament with supplementary demands in the winter session of the Parliament and got an approval for 3 lakh crores of extra expenditure. And that is the reason why the budget estimate of total expenditure last year was 34.8 lakh crores. Actual expenditure was 37.7 lakh crores. So that means practically 3 lakh crore of extra expenditure is what she incurred. It is this which has supported the economic revival. Our growth rate would not have been 9.2% if this was not done. If fiscal conservatism was the goal, we would not have achieved even 8% growth. Now, but 6.8% and 6.9%, which is the revised fiscal deficit, is more or less the same. So, what I had said last time was that there would be supplementary spending and fiscal targets will still be met. All those predictions have come true. Towards the end of my session, I am going to tell you something similar will happen this year. And I will give you my precise estimates as we proceed. But to begin with, let me tell you that 11% nominal GDP growth is extremely conservative. Given the budget proposals, and let me come to the budget proposals, the actuals will be much better. So let me highlight. Now, economists very often say that fiscal deficit by itself is not a bad thing. Fiscal deficit is bad if it finances consumption expenditure. But fiscal deficit is good if it finances capital expenditure. Now, if you see, the capital expenditure budgeted was 5.5 lakh crores and the actual was 6 lakh crores. So 50,000 was spent. However, because of the second wave of COVID and the problem cropping up with Omicron, lot of cash benefit transfer schemes had to be extended. And therefore, lot of money was spent on continuing what we were doing in the financial year 2021. And that is the reason why the money went into the hands of the bottom 30-40% of the population. It's not correct to say that the government did nothing for the poor. It's that kind of a statement would be politically motivated, contrary to facts. Whether the government did enough is a matter of debate. But to say that the government did not do much for the poor is blatantly wrong. In fact, if government had not done anything for the poor, the fiscal deficit would have been much lower. Now, coming to this year, the budget estimates basically do what? the revised estimate of 37.7 lakh crore was the expenditure. The expenditure has been raised to 39.5. So the expenditure has been raised by 1,75,000 crores. Now, let me tell you, last year, the gap between revised estimates and budget estimates was 2,87,000 crores. That means the revised estimates of expenditure is 2,87,000 crore more than the budget estimate. As I told you, it came with supplementary demands. Now, the best part is that after the budget was presented, there is a usual interaction of the finance ministry officials with the media and question answers. And at that time, the finance minister as well as the finance secretary very clearly said that if last year we could raise the actual expenditure much above the budget estimates, there is no reason to believe that we do not have that option this year. It all depends upon what the country needs. And the needs are evolving with the passage of time. So after 6 months, you would take a stock of the situation, and if required, she can again come with supplementary demands in the winter session of the parliament. Now, the fiscal deficit number, which was 15.9 lakh crores, this year it is 16.6 lakh crores, so the fiscal deficit is increased by 70,000 crores. And it is pitched at 6.4%. Now let me tell you that fiscal conservatism would have driven the finance minister to argue that let me bring the fiscal deficit below 6%. Now if she would have done that, she would have removed the fiscal space of about 1 lakh crore. So the expenditures would have been about 1 lakh crore less. But what is important is that if your capital expenditure is growing up, increasing by 2 lakh crores, 2 lakh crore is the increase in capex, then overall expenditure is rising by only 70,000 crores, so she has cut down somewhere. And where has she cut down? Obviously, she has cut down on subsidies. That is where the lot of hue and cry. Now let us understand. In the year 2021, when the pandemic hit us, when the budget was presented on 1st February 2020, COVID was nowhere. At that time, the budgeted fiscal deficit was only 3.4%. Now, that 3.4% became 9.2%, which actually means that huge amount of fiscal space was created and the subsidies went through the roof. Like for instance, the food subsidy was 5,40,000 crores. Normally, the food subsidy is around 2 lakh crores. So the food subsidy increased from 2 lakh crores to 5.5 lakh crores. And we have guys saying that government has done nothing. Now, where did this additional 3.5 lakh crore go? It went to the poor because the food subsidy goes there. Now, that was an exceptional year. Now, when normalcy returns, economy recovers, then this subsidy has to be rolled back. 541 cannot become the norm. Therefore, the budget estimate last year in 21-22 was 2.4 lakh crores. But the actual was 2.9. So she disbursed 50,000 more of subsidies because the situation demanded. Now that she has rolled back to 2.07. As I told you, the average food subsidy over the last 2 years before COVID was 2 lakh crores. And the same 2 lakh crores we are spending this year. But if your benchmark is the COVID year, then your benchmark is wrong. So therefore, it appears that the food subsidy has been rolled back, but no, it is normalization. Now, like this, the total subsidies that have been reduced is to the tune of 1,15,000 crores. That is a reduction in subsidies. Now, please remember that last year, compared to the budget, the government spent 96,000 crores more on subsidies because the need arose. If similar need arises this year, the government will spend because there is fiscal space to do that. But government has reduced 1,15,000 crore of subsidies. Now, when you reduce that 1,15,000 crore of subsidy, then with 70,000 crore increase in fiscal deficit, you can spend 2 lakh crores on capex. So what is the trade-off? Subsidies reduction versus capital expenditure increase. I don't have to go into all the budget proposals, the various infrastructure related proposals and the push which is there. I don't want to get into. You have already seen that in today's newspapers. You have heard it. So I don't want to get into that. But it's a massive, massive infrastructure pool which has been given and the money is being spent. There are no populist schemes and therefore this money is not being frittered away in populism. So focus remains that I want to revive growth. I want to revive the investment cycle. And I will cut expenditure where the expenditure is due. Actually, let me remind you that in the month of December 2021, she sent out a circular to all ministries saying that carefully look at your budget proposals and cut down whatever you think is inessential expenditure. Therefore, don't give me exaggerated thing. It is our mindset that let us ask for 100 so that we can get at least 70. She said, I'll give you what you ask. But if I find that you have exaggerated your thing, I will punish. So therefore, the ministries did a much better homework this time around. Now, sometimes you argue that, the Manrega contribution has been cut. Yeah, true. Manrega contribution has been cut. But then, Manrega contribution had shot up like the food subsidy in the pandemic year. Now, that was an abnormal level because all the migrant labor which was returning from urban areas to rural areas were all absorbed in Manrega. In fact, many of them did not return to the cities because they said that we are getting better pay here in Manrega. Now, Manrega at that time in 2020 summer was a crisis management measure. It was not a normal economic strategy of generating employment. Normal economic strategy of generating employment is economic activity. Now, the other important thing, that all the schemes which the government has, how do those schemes get actually implemented at the grassroots level? They get implemented at the grassroots level through what we call the federal cooperative federalism. Because implementation happens at the state level, implementation happens at the district level, implementation happens at the tehsil level. Now, that district and tehsil level implementation is responsibility of which administration? It's the state government. Now, very often what happens is, when center disburses money, it goes to states, and then it goes to districts, and then it goes to talukas. Now at panchayat level, at taluka level, the money will sit in their accounts. It was booked as expenditure of the central government. So revised estimates will show that expenditure. But at the grassroots level, the money is not spent. Now, when the money is not spent, why do you pump more money? So, now if you ask for status report, is it wrong? If the state governments protest that why you are doing this, then that is not true. So the point is, disbursement has to be commensurate with the administrative ability to spend and spend meaningfully. Therefore, wherever she finds that expenditure lines are saturated, there are surplus funds lying at the grassroots level, why would you put more money? Now, that does not mean that Manrega will fall. That means it will push the district administration to effectively implement the schemes. Now, let us therefore try to understand that all this misinformed criticism about reductions in certain schemes has to be related with, now sometimes we ask, what about the performance appraisal of the budgetary allocations? Now what will central government say? Central government say we have disbursed. Performance appraisal has to be done by state governments. Which state government is subjecting itself to this kind of performance appraisal? Which state government is coming forward to say that I am very poor at implementing Manrega? I am very poor at implementing many development schemes. So therefore, let us try to understand that it is very difficult to include all this in the budget because the states have to do the proper reporting and monitoring. Now, under these circumstances, let us understand that the capex increase, and what is it that she said? She explained the macroeconomic framework in very simple terms. She said that in the pandemic and the environment created by that, the companies have become cost conscious. They have started cutting costs. Since they have started cutting costs, they are doing well. They have become lean and thin organizations, efficient organizations, performing very well. But investments are not happening. Now, why investments are not happening? Very simple. Industries were shut down. No production was taking place. There was a lot of excess capacity. Now, when there is excess capacity, why would you invest to create more capacity? You will first utilize the existing capacity. So, the existing capacity was not being utilized, and therefore the investment cycle was not coming up. Now, what she says is that let public expenditure drive the revival of investment cycle. Actually, if the GDP has to grow, what are the components? The components are private consumption expenditure, government expenditure, government capital expenditure, private capital expenditure, and exports. Now, exports are affected by global environment. Private investment expenditure is also created by the domestic economic environment where everything has collapsed. Private consumption expenditure, people have become risk averse. Nobody is spending. Therefore, the bank deposits are growing, but expenditures are not. So, it has created a vicious circle. Now, you have to convert this vicious circle into a virtuous cycle. And that virtuous cycle, so you break it somewhere. So, where will you break? The only component of GDP which is independent of the global and macroeconomic environment in the country is public expenditure. And so the focus is on that. And within that, last year, the focus was on public consumption expenditure. This year, the focus is on public capital expenditure. Now, that public capital expenditure will create enabling environment where the private investment will automatically come. And when private investment automatically comes, it will generate income. Income will generate more investment will generate more consumption, and more consumption will generate more income. This is how the growth will be sustained. So, her strategy is that in the financial year 22-23, the GDP growth will be driven by public investment. She expects that by 23-24, the private investment would revive and it would supplement the government's effort to sustain the rate of economic growth. And therefore, over 22-23, 23-24, 24-25, the GDP will consistently grow. And when the GDP consistently grows, normalcy will return. And when normalcy returns, fiscal consolidation will happen. So you will go back to the situation of fiscal discipline. Now, this is the broad macroeconomic strategy that is there in this budget. And if I have to look at the various components of expenditure. She has not been conservative as far as defense expenditure is concerned. The defense expenditure has gone up. The transfer to states has also gone up very substantially, almost 1 lakh crores. Interest payments have also shot up because of the debt that we had to incur because of the past. So the only element of expenditure that she can cut is the subsidies, which is what she has done. Wages, salaries of the public servants cannot be reduced. So whatever was within her control, she has done it. Now, so it is prudent expenditure control. Meaningless allocation to schemes where delivery doesn't happen has been stopped. So it is some kind of rationalization of public expenditure on specific schemes. Now all these measures put together have enabled her to put a 2 lakh crore jump in capital expenditure and still controlling total expenditure within the limits of only 70,000 crores and therefore controlling fiscal deficit. Now, let me tell you that where my optimism about the future of Indian economy comes. As I told you at the beginning, that this 11% nominal GDP growth is a very, very conservative target. In my view, with the massive push that she has given, and please remember that there are a lot of measures which will give a fillip to domestic industry. Now just let me give one example, that the defense expenditure is going to be 3,85,000 crores. And almost 70% of this is capital expenditure. Now what is it that she has said? The defense capital expenditure, 68% will be reserved for domestic manufacture. So you just imagine, it's a question of 2 lakh crore of additional demand for domestic manufacturers of defense equipment. And we have built capacity over the last 2 years in domestic defense because of the Atmanirbhar focus. So this is just one example of how the domestic industry is going to revive. This is public expenditure driven revival of the domestic industry, which will lead to further investment in defense manufacturing, which will lead to further growth. Like that, there are virtuous cycles in every sector. Now, I therefore feel that if all goes well and we do not get a very substantive negative surprise on the front of agriculture next year in terms of weather, then the 8% GDP growth target that she has set will turn out to be conservative and we might jolly well achieve 9% GDP growth. In fact, I won't be surprised if we achieve 10%. But I bet myself that 9% GDP growth next year we are likely to achieve. Similarly, inflation is not going to be contained to 3%. The inflation, which is the GDP deflator, is going to be at least 5%. So 9% real GDP growth and 5% inflation will give you a nominal GDP growth of about 14.5%. Whereas you have assumed 11. So 3.5% will be the extra nominal GDP growth that will happen next year, which will generate fiscal space. Now, the buoyancy of taxes therefore will continue. We will come out of the recession, manufacturing sector will come out, service sector will come out. And manufacturing sector and service sector, industrial sector and service sector are the ones which contribute to tax revenues, basically. And therefore, just as we ended up with almost 3 lakh crore of additional revenue receipts this year, with almost 2 lakh crores of additional tax revenue, we would be in for at least 1 lakh crore of additional tax revenue next year, at least, because of the economic revival. And the nominal GDP growth, which will exceed, will create another fiscal space. So in my view, the possible slippage of about 1.5 lakh crores, 1.5 lakh crores can be absorbed and fiscal deficit will remain the same. Unlike last year, she has assumed only 65,000 crores of divestment target this year. Now, she was very vocal that it is better to be conservative and then overachieve rather than say 175 and achieve only 75. So the 65,000 crore of divestment target is going to be exceeded. So last year we had a shortfall of 1 lakh crore, this year we will not have. And that is the reason why additional fiscal space of 1.5 lakh crore for supplementary expenditure. So I won't be surprised if she comes in the winter session of the parliament to say that I'm going to spend this 1.5 lakh crore extra for doing all these various things. Therefore, I'm confident that we will grow at about 9%. Inflation with 5% will be under reasonable control. Now, if inflation is under control and high GDP growth, then please remember, so what is it that you have as a characteristic of Indian economy? Tax regime, stable. No change in taxes, direct or indirect. No, not much change of taxes. Policy environment, stable. I don't think that with the measures that she has taken and RBI is taking, the exchange rate will be greatly volatile. I forecast that the exchange rate of Indian economy will hover between 73 rupees to a dollar to 76 rupees to a dollar. It won't cross 76, it won't fall below 73. So you have an average of about 74, 75 rupees to a dollar exchange rate. So stable exchange rates, stable policy environment, stable tax rates, high GDP growth, moderate inflation. What else do you want to attract foreign investment? So foreign investment will come in droves in the Indian economy. In fact, the best part is the foreign institutional investors were all sleeping when she presented the budget. Next morning when they woke up and they saw what she said, they were flabbergasted. And next day, they started putting money back in the Indian economy. In fact, the market grew today riding on FII. So, foreign direct investment and foreign institutional investment will keep coming to Indian economy in 22-23 in spite of the tapering fears in the American market. So, she has taken care of all possible parameters. And I am therefore confident about the bright future of Indian economy in the year 22-23. And hopefully, when we analyze the next year's budget and therefore present a performance card of this year, remember, I'm predicting a 9% real GDP growth, 5% inflation, and 14.5% nominal GDP growth. If these numbers are achieved with exchange rate remaining relatively stable, then the tax revenue would be buoyant. One final thing. Everybody was expecting that poverty will rise substantially because of the pandemic in 2020. There is nothing as of now to suggest that the incidence of poverty has substantially increased. And that is partly because of the direct cash benefit, the direct cash transfer that happened. I wish that sometimes the government comes up with the poverty estimates in order to tell us that all these fears about growing inequalities, whether they are correct or not. Let me also allay a couple of criticisms before I conclude. One argument about these inequalities is, that the rich are getting richer and the billionaires have multiplied their wealth. Now, come on, billionaires have not multiplied their wealth by snatching money from our pockets. Billionaires have multiplied their wealth because the stock market has gone up. Last time when she presented the budget, Sensex was at 48,000 to 49,000. And I had predicted that the Sensex by the end of the year would be at least at 55,000 crores, if not more. The Sensex when she presented the budget was 58,000. Now, the journey of Sensex will continue. Now, as long as the capital market booms, the promoters' wealth will go on increasing, and therefore they will become richer. That has nothing to do with generation of income. So let us not confuse inequalities of wealth with inequalities of income. Let us try and understand that. Inequalities were there, inequalities will remain. But if the poverty has not gone up in spite of the pandemic, then we have achieved a lot. And very few countries in the world would have done that. The second important thing, very common argument. Mukesh Bhai is going to elaborate on that. Now, the noise that I keep on hearing is that nothing has been done for the common man. Now, my point is, suppose you give some tax relief. Suppose you increase the exemption limit. Suppose you temper with rates. What is it that you will give on an average to a taxpayer? 5,000 rupees per year? 6,000 rupees per year? What will that translate into? 400, 500 rupees a month? Now, with that kind of a relief, you think that is a massive relief for the common man? Now, let us understand, personal income tax, last year, that is 21-22, in the pandemic year, has gone up by 26%. Simple calculation. Tax rates have not changed. If tax revenues have gone up by 26%, the income of the taxpayers would have gone up by 26%. I mean, this is common sense. Now, what is it that the taxpayer is worried about? Income or some marginal relief on tax? I would any day prefer a finance minister who guarantees 25% increase in my nominal income. I don't mind paying tax. I don't care for tax relief, because if the economy goes down, my nominal income will not increase by 25%, my nominal income will increase by 10%. Then what will I do with the 5,000 rupees of tax relief? So let us understand, it is true that the tax relief will stimulate consumption, true. But what is more important? The more important thing is stability of the tax regime. And that is what she has really opted for. I think the common man should look at how much money goes in his pocket, not whether there is a reduction in the money that the government takes out. So long as the money that goes into the pocket in terms of per capita income and taxable income goes on rising, tax reliefs at the end of the day don't matter that much. Corporates have understood this. It is high time that people understand that. Finally, what in my mind are big negatives of the budget? The first and foremost is the rising trend of protectionism which is coming, which runs contrary to economic reforms. You raise duties in order to shun imports. You create quotas, like 2/3 of the defense manufacture reserved for the domestic companies and so on. So if you bring the tariff restrictions and quota raj back, it is good as far as a firefighting measure is concerned, crisis management measure is concerned. But that by definition means that it should be transient, temporary. If this becomes the long-term strategy, it will do damage to the Indian economy. And therefore, this protectionistic mindset has to go. And reforms of the trade and exchange rates have to take the front seat again. I'm not talking about something which is the next 1 or 2 years, but this cannot be the strategy for the next 5 years. You have to reconsider this. When the economy is back on the feet, then you roll back all these things. And finally, there is a genuine risk of inflation. Inflation can run riots. Now, if inflation is not controlled, and if it doesn't turn out to be 5% but turns out to be 8%, 9%, nominal GDP will go up, but that would again have the prospect of derailing the economy. So her challenge is, she has taken the risk. It's like you want to score 20 runs in an over. You can't do that without hitting sixes. But when you hit the six, you must ensure that you don't get caught on the boundary line. And inflation is something that can take your wicket. And therefore, she will have to, in close collaboration with the finance ministry, various ministries, and of course the Reserve Bank, will have to monitor the inflation. If we manage with 5 or 6% inflation, all will be well. But if not, it's a risk. Now, these are some of the question marks that hang. But you have to take a risk. She has taken the risk. I wish her very well, and I sincerely hope that we achieve 9% real GDP growth with inflation around 5%. In that case, we will be riding at the top of the world by the time we are into February 23. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bakul bhai. I think absolutely insightful and very happy to note that there is an upside to the nominal growth and thus upside to overall, all sectoral growth also. And of course, public spending, very important that we got to learn that public spending in the circumstances is very essential, and thus the courageous budget is a welcome thing. So thank you for the insights. Of course, I'm not going to repeat or summarize anything because that would not be the right thing to do. But one thing that certainly feels like music to ears that Dr. Dholakia mentioned, Sir Bakul bhai mentioned, was there's a potential upside to this growth, and which certainly gives a fiscal space. And if certainly, thus the risk taken was worth it, which feels good that at least we are in the good regime, and coming here should be a good growth here. Thanks again for everybody to join, and certainly a warm thanks again for Bakul bhai and our own Bakul bhai and Mukesh bhai. Thank you so much for participating and presenting. Thank you.